The hospital corridor smelled like bleach and broken promises when Dr. Raymond Mitchell burst through the double doors, his white coat flying behind him like a cape of truth. Derek Carter stood frozen near the morgue entrance, his hands still intertwined with Jessica's perfectly manicured fingers, both of them dressed head to toe in black designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. They weren't crying. They weren't even pretending to be sad anymore. The funeral director had just left 5 minutes ago with instructions for the most expensive casket, not because Derek loved his wife, but because appearances mattered in their wealthy circle of Atlanta's elite. Jessica had even smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips when she thought no one was looking, already planning how she would redecorate the mansion on Peachtree Street once Naomi's body was cold in the ground. But before you hear how everything fell apart, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because this story about a husband, his mistress, and the wife they tried to erase will leave you speechless, and you won't believe what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Derek had been counting down the hours since the doctor first told him that Naomi had flatlined, his heart not heavy with grief but light with relief, already calculating how quickly he could move Jessica into the master bedroom, and how soon they could access Naomi's business accounts without raising suspicion from her family or the board of directors at Carter Luxury Developments. "She's alive!" Dr. Mitchell's voice cut through the hallway like a knife through silk, and those two words made Derek's blood run cold in his veins. His grip on Jessica's hand tightened so hard she winced and tried to pull away, but he held on like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood in a storm. The doctor's face was flushed, a mixture of relief and confusion painting his dark features as he stopped just inches from where they stood, his chest heaving from running through 3 floors of the hospital. "Mr. Carter, your wife is alive. Naomi is alive. I don't know how to explain it, but her heart started beating again. We've got her stabilized now, and she's breathing on her own." The word should have brought joy, should have made a loving husband fall to his knees in gratitude. But Derek's face went through a series of expressions that Dr. Mitchell would remember for the rest of his career. First shock, then something that looked dangerously close to anger, and finally a mass of appropriate relief that came too late and looked too fake. Jessica had already dropped his hand and stepped back, her red-bottom Louboutins clicking against the tile floor, her face pale beneath her expensive makeup, foundation suddenly looking like a mask that couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. She had already posted a subtle message on social media about loss and moving forward, carefully worded but clear enough that the inner circle would understand that Derek was about to be available and rich. "That's impossible," Derek heard himself say, and immediately regretted it because what kind of husband says that when told his wife survived death? Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows drew together, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face as he studied a man who should be overjoyed but instead looked like someone had just stolen his winning lottery ticket. "I mean, that's incredible. That's a miracle. Can I see her?" The words tumbled out too fast, too rehearsed, and Derek could feel the doctor's judgment even before he saw it in his eyes. Behind him, Jessica had pulled out her phone, probably deleting that post as fast as her trembling fingers could move, her breathing quick and shallow like someone on the edge of a panic attack. They had been so careful, so patient, waiting 3 years for the perfect opportunity to make Naomi disappear from their lives without anyone suspecting murder or foul play. The mysterious illness that had suddenly struck Naomi 2 weeks ago had seemed like a gift from the universe, a stroke of luck that would solve all their problems without them having to get their hands dirty. Derek had watched his wife deteriorate day by day, her strong body that had built a real estate empire from nothing growing weaker, and he had felt nothing but anticipation mixed with just enough fake concern to keep the doctors and nurses from asking uncomfortable questions. "You can see her, but she's very weak and confused," Dr. Mitchell said, his tone professional but his eyes sharp and assessing, watching Derek like a man who had just realized he might be looking at something darker than grief. "She's been asking for you, actually. Kept saying your name when she woke up. She seemed distressed." The doctor paused, and in that pause, Derek felt the weight of unspoken accusations. "Mr. Carter, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has your wife been taking any medications that we might not know about? Anything that wasn't prescribed by a primary physician? Because her symptoms, the way she crashed and then recovered, it's not consistent with any natural illness I've seen in 20 years of practice." The question hung in the air like smoke, and Derek could feel sweat forming at the back of his neck despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. Jessica had moved even further away now, practically pressed against the wall, her eyes wide and calculating, probably already planning her exit strategy and wondering if Derek would throw her under the bus to save himself. They had been poisoning Naomi slowly with antifreeze mixed into her expensive vitamin smoothers every morning, just small amounts that mimicked the symptoms of kidney disease, untraceable if you weren't specifically looking for it. Also, Jessica's cousin who worked in a veterinary clinic had promised them. No, nothing like that, Derek managed to say, forcing his voice to sound steady even though his mind was racing through every conversation, every moment, every possible piece of evidence that could connect him to Naomi's mysterious illness. Naomi's always been healthy, took her vitamins, ate organic, the whole thing. This came out of nowhere. He looked at Jessica, a silent message passing between them, a message that said, "Keep your mouth shut and stick to the story we planned." But the story they had planned ended with Naomi dead and buried, not alive and asking questions, not recovering in a hospital bed with doctors who were now suspicious and a wife who might remember something that would destroy everything they had built on lies and betrayal. Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly, but his expression said he didn't believe a word of it, his hand moving to the pocket where his phone rested, probably already thinking about who he needed to call and what tests he needed to run. "Room 412, he said finally, stepping aside to let Derek pass, but his eyes never left the man in the expensive black suit who wore mourning clothes like a costume. "Your wife is waiting for you, Mr. Carter. I suggest you go see her now, because we're going to be running some very thorough tests, and I have a feeling we're going to find some very interesting answers." The threat was clear, wrapped in professional courtesy but sharp as a scalpel, and as Derek walked toward the elevator with Jessica trailing behind him like a shadow dressed in guilty black, he knew that their carefully constructed plan had just collapsed, and the woman they tried to kill was about to become their worst nightmare. If you think Derek and Jessica are about to face justice, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think Naomi should do when she finds out the truth, because this story is just getting started and the revenge is going to be sweet. Naomi Carter's hospital room was painted in soft blues and grays, colors meant to calm patients, but there was nothing calm about the energy that filled the space when Derek pushed open the door. His wife lay propped against white pillows, her natural hair pulled back in a silk bonnet that her mother must have brought, her brown skin looking ashen and tired, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had negotiated million-dollar deals and spotted lies from across boardroom tables, were fully alert and watching him like a hawk watching a snake. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way that Naomi Carter had never been fragile in the 15 years he had known her, and for a moment Derek felt something twist in his chest that might have been guilt or might have been fear that she would be strong enough to figure out what he had done. Jessica had disappeared into the bathroom down the hall, claiming she needed a moment to compose herself, but really she was terrified to face the woman whose husband she had been sleeping with for 3 years, whose house she had already mentally redecorated, whose entire life she had been trying to steal piece by expensive piece. Naomi's heart monitor beeped steadily, a sound that should have comforted Derek, but instead sounded like a ticking clock counting down to his exposure and destruction. Her hands, usually so confident and strong when signing contracts or shaking hands with investors, lay pale against the thin hospital blanket, and 4-line running into her left arm pumping fluids and medications that were keeping her alive when she should have been dead. "Baby," Derek said, and even he could hear how false it sounded, how the endearment that he used to mean years ago now felt like ashes in his mouth. He moved closer to the bed, aware that Naomi was watching his every movement, cataloging every expression on his face with the same attention to detail that had made her one of Atlanta's most successful black female real estate developers before she turned 40. "Thank God you're okay. I thought I lost you. The doctor said your heart stopped, and I—" He let his voice trail off, reaching for her hand. But Naomi pulled it away slightly, a movement so small that someone else might have missed it, but Derek felt it like a slap across his face. Her eyes narrowed, just a fraction, and he saw something that made his stomach drop, a suspicion that was starting to take root and grow like weeds in fertile soil. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, despite the air conditioning that hummed in the background, and Derek realized that his wife, even weak and barely recovered from what should have been her deathbed, was still the smartest person in any room she occupied. "Why are you wearing black?" Naomi's voice was rough, scratchy from the breathing tube they had removed just an hour ago, but the question was sharp and clear and dangerous. Derek looked down at his clothes as if seeing them for the first time. The expensive black suit he had chosen so carefully this morning, the black tie, even his black leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. He had dressed for a funeral, for freedom, for a celebration disguised as mourning, and now those same clothes were evidence of his guilt hanging on his body like a neon sign, screaming his secrets to anyone who cared to look closely enough. The doctor said you weren't going to make it," he stammered, hating how weak he sounded, how the lie crumbled in his mouth before he could even properly form it. "They told me to prepare for the worst, so I was getting ready to." He couldn't finish the sentence because how do you tell your wife that you were planning her funeral while she was still fighting for her life? How do you explain that you had already picked out her casket and chosen the flowers and decided which of her business assets you would sell first? Naomi's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, a recognition of betrayal that went deeper than just the clothes he wore, a knowing that came from 15 years of marriage to a man she thought she understood but was now realizing she had never really known at all. "You look disappointed," she said finally, and those 3 words carried the weight of accusation and hurt and a dawning understanding that made Derek's blood run cold. "Don't say that," Derek replied, trying to inject warmth and concern into his voice, moving closer to the bed again despite every instinct telling him to run, to get out of this room before his wife's sharp mind put together all the pieces of the puzzle that would destroy his life. "I'm relieved. Baby, I'm so grateful you're alive. You scared me so badly." He reached for her hand again, and this time she let him take it, but her fingers were limp and cold in his grip, no returning pressure, no warmth, just dead weight that felt like touching a corpse. Naomi's eyes moved past him to the door, and Derek turned to see Jessica standing in the doorway, still in her black dress that hugged every curve, her face carefully arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. The 2 women stared at each other across the hospital room, and Derek felt like he was watching 2 predators size each other up before a fight, both of them beautiful, both of them dangerous in different ways, and him caught in the middle of a situation that was spiraling out of his control faster than he could manage. "Who is that?" Naomi asked, even though Derek had introduced Jessica before as his new executive assistant, even though Jessica had been to their house for several dinner parties where she had smiled and laughed and complimented Naomi's taste while secretly planning to take everything she had built. "That's Jessica, my assistant. Remember?" Derek said quickly, too quickly, the words tumbling over each other in his rush to explain why his assistant would be at the hospital dressed in mourning clothes standing in the doorway of his wife's room looking guilty as sin. "She came to support me when I got the call about you. She's been very helpful during this difficult time." The explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears, and he saw Naomi's jaw tighten, saw a free hand curl into a fist against the blanket, so the exact moment when his wife's brilliant mind made a connection that he had prayed she would never make. Jessica, to her credit or perhaps her stupidity, walked into the room with her hand extended like she was at a business meeting, her heels clicking against the floor with confidence she definitely should not have been feeling. "Mrs. Carter, I'm so glad you're recovering," Jessica said, and Derek wanted to strangle her because this was not the time for his mistress to pretend to care about his wife's health. "Mr. Carter has been so worried about you. We all have." The use of "we" was a mistake, a slip that revealed too much, and Derek saw Naomi catch it, saw her eyes sharpen with understanding that cut through the fog of medication and weakness. The heart monitor's beeping increased slightly, Naomi's pulse quickening as she processed what was happening, who was standing in her hospital room wearing black, who had been supporting her husband while she lay dying. "Get out," Naomi said, her voice still rough but filled with a quiet fury that made both Derek and Jessica freeze in place like children caught stealing cookies. "Both of you, get out of my room right now." Her hand reached for the call button, fingers trembling but determined, and Derek knew that if she pressed it, if she called the nurses and started asking questions about who had been visiting her and who had access to her food and medications, everything would unravel faster than he could possibly contain it. Dr. Mitchell's suspicions, Naomi's intelligence, Jessica's presence in mourning clothes. It was all adding up to a picture that would put him in prison for attempted murder if anyone looked close enough at the evidence. "Naomi, please, you're upset and weak. You need to rest." Derek tried, but his wife's eyes were blazing now despite her physical weakness, her finger hovering over the cold button like a weapon waiting to be fired. "I need you to leave," she repeated, each word deliberate and cold as ice. "And Derek, when I get out of this hospital, we're going to have a very long conversation about a lot of things, including why you and your assistant are dressed like you just came from my funeral." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear, and as a nurse bustled into the room responding to some alert on Naomi's monitors, Derek grabbed Jessica's arm and pulled her out into the hallway, his mind racing through options that were all bad, all leading to exposure and consequences he wasn't prepared to face. Do you think Naomi already knows the truth? Comment below if you think she should forgive him or make him pay. And don't forget to subscribe because the next chapter is going to reveal secrets that will change everything. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Naomi starts digging into her husband's lies. 3 days after Naomi Carter woke up from what should have been her death, she sat in her hospital bed with her laptop balanced on her knees and a determination in her eyes that would have made her enemies in the business world nervous if they could see her now. The doctors wanted her to rest, to focus on recovery, to let her body heal from whatever mysterious illness had nearly killed her. But Naomi hadn't built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire by sitting back and letting life happen to her. She had always been the kind of woman who took control, who asked questions until she got answers, who trusted her instincts even when everyone else told her she was wrong. And right now every instinct in her body was screaming that something was very wrong with her husband and that woman who dressed like a widow at someone else's funeral. Her mother had brought her the laptop yesterday along with her favorite silk pajamas and a bag full of healthy snacks, clucking her tongue about how thin Naomi had gotten, and asking questions about Derek that Naomi wasn't ready to answer yet because how do you tell your mother that you think your husband might have tried to kill you? The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the click of her fingers on the keyboard as she logged into her company's financial systems, checking accounts and transfers and expenses that Derek had access to as a husband and supposed partner in building their wealth. What Naomi found in those first few hours of digging made her stomach turn and her heart rate spike enough that a nurse came rushing in to check on her. Money had been moving out of their joint accounts for months. Small amounts at first that she might not have noticed if she had been healthy and paying attention, but then larger sums that went to credit cards she didn't recognize and payment for things that made no sense to their lifestyle. There was a recurring payment to a luxury apartment complex in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most expensive neighborhoods, an apartment that wasn't theirs and wasn't any property they owned for investment purposes. There were charges at jewelry stores for pieces Naomi had never received, at restaurants she had never eaten at with her husband, at a fertility clinic that made her blood run cold because she and Derek had stopped trying for children 2 years ago after multiple failures that had broken her heart but apparently not as interested in having a family. The evidence was there in black and white, numbers that told a story of betrayal and deception and a life that Derek had been building with someone else using money that Naomi had earned through 70-hour work weeks and sacrifices and believing that she was building a future with a man who loved her. She took screenshots of everything, saved files to secure cloud storage that Derek didn't know about, building a case against her husband with the same methodical precision she used when acquiring properties or negotiating deals. But the financial infidelity was just the beginning, and Naomi knew she needed more than bank statements to understand the full picture of what had been happening while she was too busy building her empire to notice her marriage crumbling. She called her assistant Marcus, a young gay black man who had been with her company for 5 years and was loyal in a way that Naomi was realizing her husband had never been, and she asked him to do something that felt dirty but necessary. "Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about Jessica Reynolds," Naomi said, her voice still weak but her words clear and purposeful. "She works as Derek's assistant, but I think there's more to it than that. I need to know where she lives, who she knows, how long she's been working for him, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Marcus said carefully, "Naomi, are you sure you want to know? Sometimes ignorance is easier than truth." But Naomi had never chosen easy over truth in her entire life, and she wasn't about to start now when her very survival might depend on understanding who wanted her dead and why. "I need to know," she insisted, and Marcus sighed but agreed because he understood that his boss was a woman who faced problems head-on rather than hiding from them. The information Marcus gathered over the next 24 hours painted a picture that was somehow worse than anything Naomi had imagined in her darkest moments lying in that hospital bed. Jessica Reynolds wasn't just Derek's assistant. She was a woman with a history of targeting wealthy married men, a woman who had been fired from her last job for an affair with her boss that ended his marriage and nearly bankrupted him in the divorce. She had met Derek at a real estate conference 3 years ago, right around the time that he had started becoming distant and critical of Naomi, finding fault with her work schedule and her dedication to her business and her inability to have children, as if those were flaws rather than circumstances of a complicated life. Jessica lived in that Buckhead apartment that Derek was paying for, drove a BMW that was registered in Derek's name, wore jewelry that matched the charges Naomi had found on their credit cards, and according to Marcus's contact in Atlanta's social circles, had been telling people for months that she was about to become Mrs. Derek Carter once his current wife was out of the picture. That phrase, out of the picture, echoed in Naomi's mind like a death sentence that she had somehow survived, and suddenly her mysterious illness didn't seem so mysterious anymore. The doctors had mentioned something about her symptoms being consistent with poisoning, though they couldn't find a definitive cause, and now Naomi wondered if the expensive vitamin smoothies that Derek had started making for her every morning 6 months ago were actually filled with something more sinister than organic kale and imported acai berries. Dr. Mitchell visited Naomi's room that evening, his expression serious and concerned in a way that made her pulse quicken even before he started talking. "Mrs. Carter, I wanted to discuss your test results with you privately before we talk to your husband," he began, closing the door behind him and pulling up a chair close to her bed like he was about to deliver news that required sitting down. "We found traces of ethylene glycol in your blood work, which is a main ingredient in antifreeze. It's a poison that, when ingested in small amounts over time, can cause symptoms that mimic kidney disease and other illnesses. If we hadn't caught it when we did, if your heart hadn't stopped and forced us to run these specific tests, you would have died within a week, and we probably would have listed it as organ failure from unknown causes." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and damning, and confirming what Naomi had already started to suspect in the quiet hours of the night when she couldn't sleep, and her mind kept circling back to Derek's disappointment when he learned she was alive. "Someone poisoned me," Naomi said, and it wasn't a question because she already knew the answer, already knew her be making her smoothies every morning and watching her drink them down while pretending to be a concerned husband worried about her health and wellness. Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly, his hand reaching for Hayes in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "I've already contacted the police and reported my findings as required by law when we suspect poisoning," he said gently. "They'll want to talk to you about who had access to your food and drinks, who might have wanted to harm you. Mrs. Carter, I need you to understand that someone tried to murder you, and they almost succeeded." The police came 2 hours later, 2 detectives who introduced themselves as Williams and Chen, a black woman and an Asian man who both looked competent and serious as they pulled out notebooks and recording devices and asked Naomi to start from the beginning. She told them everything, from the smoothies to the affair to the financial evidence she had gathered to the way Derek and Jessica had shown up at the hospital dressed in morning clothes, looking disappointed rather than relieved that she had survived. The detectives listened without interrupting, taking notes and exchanging glances that told Naomi they had heard stories like this before, stories of husbands who thought they could trade in their wives for younger models if they could just make the old ones disappear permanently and conveniently. "We're going to need to take your husband's statement," Detective Williams said finally, her voice calm but her eyes sharp with the instinct of someone who had seen too many women almost die at the hands of men who promised to love them forever. "We'll also need to examine your home, particularly your kitchen, and we'll want to talk to this Jessica Reynolds as well. Mrs. Carter, I want you to know that we take attempted murder very seriously, and if your husband or anyone else tried to kill you, we will build a case that will put them in prison for a very long time." The words should have brought Naomi comfort, but instead she just felt tired and sad and angry that her life had come to this moment, lying in a hospital bed telling police officers that her husband of 15 years had tried to poison her so he could be with his mistress. Can you believe Derek thought he would get away with this? Hit that subscribe button and comment what punishment you think he deserves, because the next chapter is going to show you exactly what happens when a man underestimates a woman he tried to kill. And trust me, Naomi is just getting started with her revenge. Derek Carter sat in the police interrogation room with sweat forming on his upper lip despite the aggressive air conditioning that made the small gray space feel like a refrigerator designed to make suspect uncomfortable and confessional. He had been waiting for 20 minutes, watching his reflection in the two-way mirror and wondering who was watching him from the other side, wondering how much they knew and how much was just suspicion that he could talk his way out of if he stayed calm and stuck to his story. His lawyer, Kenneth Morrison, a slick corporate attorney who specialized in protecting wealthy clients from their own bad decisions, sat beside him in a $1,500 suit that screamed money and privilege and the kind of legal representation that could make problems disappear if you paid enough. But even Kenneth looked worried, his usual confident expression replaced with something tighter around his eyes, something that said maybe this time money and smooth talking wouldn't be enough to save his client from the consequences of his actions. Derek's phone had been confiscated when the police showed up at his office that morning with a warrant for his arrest on charges of attempted murder, and his last text to Jessica telling her to run and hide and not talk to anyone was probably being read by detectives right now along with every other message that would prove their fair in their plans and their guilt. The door opened and Detective Williams walked in followed by Detective Chen, both of them carrying thick folders that Derek hoped were mostly empty but suspected were filled with evidence that would bury him 6 feet under prison for the rest of his life. "Mr. Carter, thank you for waiting," Detective Williams said, her tone professional but her eyes cold as she sat down across from him and opened her folder to reveal printouts of text messages that made Derek's stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. "We'd like to ask you some questions about your wife's illness and your relationship with Jessica Reynolds." She slid the first page across the table, and Derek saw his own words staring back at him, a text from 2 months ago that said, "Once Naomi is gone, we can finally be together without hiding," sent at 2 in the morning when he thought his wife was asleep but was probably already fighting the poison that was slowly killing her from the inside out. Kenneth put a hand on Derek's arm, a warning to stay quiet and let the lawyer do the talking. But Derek's mind was racing through every conversation, every moment, every stupid decision that had led him to this cold room where his freedom was slipping away like water through his fingers. "My client has been under tremendous stress with his wife's illness," Kenneth began, his voice smooth and practiced like he was addressing a jury rather than 2 detectives who had heard every excuse in the book. Any messages he may have sent were expressions of emotional distress, not evidence of criminal intent. But Detective Chen was already sliding more pages across the table. Bank statements showing payments to Jessica's apartment, credit card receipts from the jewelry store, records from a fertility clinic that proved Derek had been trying to have a baby with his mistress while his wife lay dying in their marital bed. "Mr. Carter, we found antifreeze in your garage," Detective Williams continued, her voice cutting through Kenneth's objections like a knife through butter. "We also found traces of the same substance in the blender you used to make your wife's morning smoothies, and on a measuring cup hidden in the back of your pantry. Your fingerprints are all over these items." She pulled out photos now, crime scene images that showed Derek's carefully maintained kitchen transformed into evidence of attempted murder, every surface marked with little yellow tags that indicated where investigators had found proof of his guilt. Derek felt the room spinning, felt his carefully constructed life falling apart in real time as the detectives laid out their case piece by piece like they were building a wall that would trap him forever. "We also have testimony from Jessica Reynolds," Detective Chen added, and those words hit Derek like a physical blow because Jessica had promised she would never talk, had sworn that they would protect each other no matter what happened. "She's cooperating fully with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She told us everything, Mr. Carter. About the affair, about the plan to kill your wife, about how you convinced her that Naomi's death would look natural if you used small amounts of poison over several months." The betrayal was complete, not just of his wife but now from his mistress, who had apparently decided that saving herself was more important than the love they had supposedly shared for 3 years. Kenneth was talking fast now, negotiating and objecting and trying to spin the evidence into something less damning. But Derek barely heard him because all he could think about was how he had thrown away 15 years of marriage, a comfortable life, and his freedom for a woman who wore black to celebrate his wife's death and then sold him out the moment the police applied pressure. Jessica had given them everything, every detail of their plan, every conversation where they had discussed the best way to kill Naomi without getting caught, every moment of their affair that proved premeditation and intent and malice aforethought that would add years to whatever sentence he was about to face. "Where is she?" Derek asked suddenly, interrupting his lawyer and drawing sharp looks from both detectives. "Where is Jessica? I want to see her." Detective Williams smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was a smile of someone who had just won a game that her opponent didn't even know he was losing. "Ms. Reynolds is in protective custody, giving her full statement as we speak," she said. "She's telling us how you approached her with the idea, how you researched different poisons online, how you tested small amounts on yourself first to make sure it wouldn't be immediately obvious what killed your wife. She's very thorough, Mr. Carter. She even kept a diary of everything you did together, including detailed descriptions of your murder plot. It's quite damning." The interrogation continued for another 2 hours, Detective Williams and Detective Chen taking turns asking questions that Derek couldn't answer without incriminating himself further, laying out evidence that painted him as a cold-blooded killer who had slowly poisoned his wife while pretending to care about her health and recovery. They showed him security footage from the hospital the day Naomi woke up, showing him and Jessica dressed in black looking anything but relieved when Dr. Mitchell announced that Naomi had survived, their expressions caught on camera in a moment of unguarded disappointment that juries would see and understand exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. They had financial records showing that Derek had taken out a life insurance policy on Naomi just 6 months before she got sick, a $2 million policy that would have made him very wealthy on top of inheriting her business and properties if she had died as planned. Kenneth tried to argue that life insurance was normal for wealthy couples, that it didn't prove intent to murder, but even he seemed to know that the evidence was overwhelming, and his client was going down hard and fast with no hope of walking away from this disaster. "Mr. Carter, we have enough evidence to charge you with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and poisoning," Detective Williams said finally, standing up and gathering her folders like she was closing a book on Derek's life. "You're going to be formally arrested and arraigned, and given the severity of the crime and the flight risk you pose as a wealthy individual with resources, we'll be recommending that bail be denied. You should prepare yourself for the possibility that you won't be going home tonight or any night for a very long time." Derek was processed through the system like any other criminal, stripped of his expensive watch and his designer suit and his dignity as he was photographed and fingerprinted, and led to a holding cell that smelled like desperation and regret, and the accumulated failures of men who thought they were smarter than the law. His cellmate was a young kid who had been arrested for drug possession, barely 20 years old with his whole life ahead of him, and when he asked Derek what he was in for, Derek couldn't bring himself to say the words attempted murder because saying them out loud made them real in a way that sitting in the interrogation room hadn't quite achieved. He thought about Naomi lying in that hospital bed, thought about the woman he had married 15 years ago when she was just starting her real estate business with nothing but ambition and determination and a belief that they could build something great together. He thought about the moment when he had stopped seeing her as a partner and started seeing her as an obstacle to the life he wanted with Jessica. The exact moment when love had turned to resentment, and resentment had turned to murder plotted over morning coffee and late-night text messages. The cell was cold and uncomfortable, the thin mattress on the metal bunk nothing like the luxury bed in the mansion that Naomi had bought with her own money, and as Derek lay there staring at the ceiling and listening to sounds of other prisoners and guards moving through the facility, he realized that he had traded everything for nothing, that Jessica's love had been as fake as his concern for his wife's health, and that the woman he had tried to kill was going to be the one who ultimately destroyed him from her hospital bed with nothing but the truth and the evidence he had been too arrogant to hide properly. Do you think Derek deserves what's coming to him? Smash that like button if you want to see him pay for what he did. And make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter brings Naomi face to face with Jessica. And you won't believe what happens when these two women finally have it out over the man who betrayed them both. Naomi Carter walked out of Grady Memorial Hospital 2 weeks after nearly dying, her steps slow but steady, her mother on one side and her best friend Tasha on the other, both of them holding her arms like she might collapse at any moment even though Naomi felt stronger than she had in months. The poison was out of her system, her organs were recovering, And most importantly, her mind was clear and sharp and focused on rebuilding the life that her husband and his mistress had tried to steal from her with antifreeze and lies and black funeral clothes worn too early. The Atlanta sun felt warm on her face as they helped her into Tasha's car, a reminder that she was alive when she should have been buried 6 feet underground while Derek and Jessica divided up her assets and erased a memory like she had never existed at all. Her mother kept fussing over her, adjusting her seatbelt and asking if she needed water or if the sun was too bright or if they should have brought a pillow for the drive home, the kind of worried attention that came from almost losing your daughter to a husband who served poison in smoothies disguised as health and love. Tasha drove carefully through Atlanta's busy streets toward the mansion in Buckhead that Naomi had bought 7 years ago when her business really took off. The house that had represented success and achievement and everything she had worked for, now tainted with the knowledge that Derek had been planning to share it with another woman before Naomi's body was even cold. The house looked the same from the outside, its elegant brick facade and manicured lawn showing no signs of the darkness that had been growing inside its walls for 3 years. But when Naomi walked through the front door, everything felt different, contaminated by betrayal and attempted murder and the ghost of the marriage she thought she had been living while her husband plotted her death in the same kitchen where they used to cook together on Sunday mornings before her business got too demanding and his resentment got too heavy to hide. The police had already been through the house, taking evidence and photographing everything, leaving behind small markers and tags that showed where they had found the antifreeze in the garage, the contaminated blender in the kitchen, the measuring cup hidden behind boxes of expensive organic pasta that Naomi bought from Whole Foods believing she was investing in a healthy future that Derek was actively trying to cut short. Tasha helped her settle on the living room couch, the same couch where Naomi had sat with Derek countless times watching movies and planning vacations and discussing their dreams, never knowing that his dreams had stopped including her somewhere along the way and started focusing on a younger woman with no morals and an apartment paid for with Naomi's money. Her mother disappeared into the kitchen to make tea, probably also checking to make sure there was nothing left in there that could hurt her daughter, a mother's protective instinct that came too late but was appreciated nonetheless. "I want to see her," Naomi said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen over the room while Tasha sat in the armchair across from her looking worried and protective like a lioness guarding her injured pride mate. "I want to see Jessica. I need to look her in the eyes and understand what kind of woman helps a man kill his wife." Tasha immediately started shaking her head, her locks swinging with the emphatic motion, her expression saying this was a terrible idea even before the words left her mouth. "Naomi, no. That woman is toxic and dangerous, and you don't need to subject yourself to her presence after everything she's done to you," Tasha argued. But Naomi had always been stubborn, had always been the kind of person who needed to confront her problems head-on rather than avoiding them or letting other people handle them for her. The detective said she's cooperating with the investigation, which means she's not in jail yet. Naomi continued, her voice gaining strength as she talked about revenge and confrontation and closure that she needed more than she needed rest or caution. "She's probably at that apartment that Derek was paying for, the one in Buckhead with my money. I want to go there. I want her to see that I'm alive and that her plan failed and that she's going to pay for what she tried to do to me." Her mother came back from the kitchen with tea on a tray, catching the end of the conversation, and immediately siding with Tasha about how this was a bad idea that could only end in more hurt and drama. But Naomi was determined, and when Naomi Carter made up her mind about something, very few people could change it, which was how she had built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing, and how she was going to rebuild her life from the ashes of a destroyed marriage. 2 days later, against the advice of everyone who cared about her, Naomi stood outside the luxury apartment building in Buckhead where Jessica Reynolds lived in comfort purchased with stolen money and stolen time and stolen pieces of someone else's husband. The building was modern and expensive, exactly the kind of place that would appeal to a woman who valued appearances over authenticity, with adornment and marble floors and the smell of money and the air conditioning that kept everything at a perfect 72 degrees. Naomi had called ahead, using a number that Detective Williams had reluctantly provided after Naomi made it clear that she was going to find Jessica one way or another, and it would be better if the police knew about it rather than being surprised by a confrontation that could complicate their case. Jessica had agreed to meet her, probably out of curiosity or guilt or some twisted desire to justify her actions to the woman she had tried to help murder. And as Naomi rode the elevator up to the 8th floor, her heart pounded not with fear but with a righteous anger that had been building since the moment she realized her husband's disappointment that she had survived death. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Naomi walked down the carpeted hallway to apartment 812, her hand steady as she knocked on the door that Derek's credit card statement said he had been entering regularly for 3 years while pretending to work late at the office. Jessica Reynolds opened the door looking smaller and more ordinary than Naomi had expected. Not the seductive temptress of her imagination, but just a regular woman in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun and her face free of makeup, showing dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and guilty consciences. For a long moment they just stared at each other, the wife and the mistress, the survivor and the accomplice, two women whose lives had become tangled together in the worst possible way through the actions of a man who had betrayed them both in different ways. "Mrs. Carter," Jessica said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, and she stepped back to let Naomi into the apartment that smelled like expensive candles and new furniture and the kind of carefully curated life that Jessica had been building with money that wasn't Hayes to spend. The apartment was tastefully decorated in grays and whites with pops of gold, trendy and modern, and completely lacking in any personal touches that would indicate who Jessica really was beneath the surface of designer clothes and stolen ambitions. Naomi walked slowly through the living room, taking in the details, the framed photos of Jessica and Derek that had apparently been taken down recently based on the marks on the walls where they used to hang, the kitchen where Jessica probably practiced making smoothies that would never contain poison because she wasn't the one doing the actual killing, just the one providing motivation and reward, and a future that was supposed to start once Naomi's funeral was over and forgotten. "Why?" Naomi asked, turning to face Jessica, who stood near the door like she was ready to run if this confrontation turned violent or too emotionally overwhelming to handle. "Why would you help him try to kill me? What did I ever do to you except exist and be married to a man who clearly wasn't worth either of our time or trust?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and genuine curiosity, because Naomi truly couldn't understand what kind of person participated in murder for the prize of a cheating husband and a house built on someone else's corpse. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but Naomi felt no sympathy for them, no softness for the woman who had worn black to her almost funeral, looking disappointed when Dr. Mitchell announced she had survived. "I loved him," Jessica said, like that was an explanation. Like love was supposed to excuse attempted murder and betrayal, and spending 3 years sleeping with someone else's husband while pretending to be just an assistant who worked late hours. He said you didn't love him anymore, that you cared more about your business than your marriage, that you made him feel small and unimportant. He said once you were gone, we could finally be happy together. The words revealed so much about Derek's manipulation, how he had painted himself as a victim of Naomi's success rather than the beneficiary of her hard work and the comfort her money provided, how he had sold Jessica a story of tragic marriage and justified murder that made her feel like a rescue rather than a home wrecker and an accomplice to attempted homicide. "So you decided the solution was to kill me?" Naomi's voice rose now, anger breaking through her careful control, her hands clenching into fists at her sides as she faced a woman who had almost made her children orphans before they were even born, who had almost erased her from the world so completely that people would forget she had ever built something meaningful and important. "You could have just had the affair. You could have let him divorce me like a normal person. But instead you two decided that murder was easier than honesty, that poison was simpler than paperwork, that my life was worth less than your convenience and his inheritance." Jessica was crying openly now, mascara that she must have put on before Naomi arrived running down her face in black streams that looked like the mourning clothes she had worn too early. "I didn't know he was actually doing it," she sobbed, and Naomi almost laughed at the lie because Detective Williams had told her about Jessica's diary, about the detailed entries describing their murder plot and her excitement about becoming the next Mrs. Carter. "I thought we were just talking, just fantasizing. When you got sick, I didn't realize." But Naomi cut her off with a sharp gesture, not willing to listen to lies and excuses and attempts to minimize her role in a crime that had nearly succeeded. "You knew," Naomi said coldly, her voice like ice that matched the poison they had put in her system. You knew and you encouraged him and you helped him plan it, and you counted down the days until I will be dead so you could move into my house and spend my money and live my life like I had never existed at all. The confrontation lasted another 30 minutes, Naomi's anger pouring out in waves of accusations and questions, and the kind of raw pain that came from being betrayed by someone who had promised to love and cherish her until death did them part, not realizing that Derek had planned to make that death come much sooner than natural causes would allow. Jessica alternated between defending herself and breaking down in tears, between claiming she was a victim of Derek's manipulation, and admitting that she had known exactly what was happening and had done nothing to stop it because she wanted Naomi's life more than she valued Naomi's right to live it. By the time Naomi left the apartment, she felt exhausted but also strangely lighter, like confronting her almost killer had released some of the poison that had been festering in her soul even after the doctors had cleaned it from her blood. She rode the elevator down to the lobby in silence, walked past a doorman who nodded politely, having no idea that he had just witnessed the aftermath of attempted murder playing out in his expensive building, and stepped out into the Atlanta sunshine that felt warm and brighter because she was alive to feel it despite everyone's best efforts to make sure she wasn't. Tasha was waiting in the car, having driven Naomi despite her objections because good friends don't let wounded friends confront their attempted murderers alone, and as Naomi slid into the passenger seat, Tasha took one look at her face and simply asked, "Did you get what you needed?" Naomi nodded slowly, buckling her seatbelt and looking back at the building that housed a woman who had tried to steal everything from her, feeling not closure exactly, but something close to it, something that felt like the beginning of moving forward rather than staying trapped in the moment when she realized her husband wanted her dead. Can you believe Jessica actually tried to play victim? Drop a comment telling me if you think she deserves prison time. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because the final chapter is going to show you exactly how Naomi takes back her power and builds a life that's even better than the one they tried to destroy. 6 months after Naomi Carter survived her own murder, she stood in the courtroom wearing a burgundy power suit that made her look like the successful businesswoman she had always been, watching as the judge sentenced Derek Carter to 25 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom was packed with people from Atlanta's black professional community, business associates, and friends and family members who had watched Naomi build her empire from nothing, and were there to support her as she watched her husband pay for trying to tear it all down along with her life. Derek looked smaller somehow in his orange jumpsuit, his usual confidence stripped away by months in county jail waiting for trial, his expensive suits replaced with prison clothes that didn't care about his status or his charm or his ability to manipulate women into helping him commit crimes. Jessica Reynolds sat in a different part of the courtroom in her own orange jumpsuit, her deal with prosecutors having fallen through when evidence showed she had been far more involved in planning Naomi's murder than she initially admitted. Her diary entries and text messages proving premeditation and active participation that earned her 15 years in prison despite her tears and her lawyer's arguments about being manipulated by a controlling older man. The judge's voice was firm and clear as he talked about the sanctity of marriage vows and the special betrayal when someone who promises to love and protect you instead tries to kill you slowly with poison served in smoothies disguised as health and wellness. And Naomi felt a sense of justice settling over her like a warm blanket, even though no amount of prison time could fully compensate for the months she had spent dying without knowing why. After the sentencing, Naomi stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters and cameras and people asking questions about how it felt to see her husband go to prison and whether she could ever trust anyone again after such profound betrayal. She handled the press conference with the same grace and intelligence she brought to business negotiations, answering questions honestly but maintaining her dignity and privacy where it mattered most. I want other women to know that if something feels wrong in your marriage, trust your instincts. Naomi said into the microphone thrust toward her face, her voice strong and clear and carrying the authority of someone who had survived something that should have killed her. I was so busy building my business that I missed the signs that my husband had changed, that he resented my success instead of celebrating it, that he saw me as an obstacle instead of a partner. But I survived, and I'm here to tell you that no relationship is worth your life, no love is worth ignoring warning signs, and no amount of couples counseling can fix a man who would rather poison you than divorce you. The reporter scribbled notes and recorded her words, and Naomi knew that this statement would be replayed on news channels and shared on social media and maybe, hopefully, would help some other woman recognize danger before it was too late. Marcus stood beside her looking proud and protective, having been promoted to vice president of Carter Luxury Developments in recognition of his loyalty and his help in gathering evidence that contributed to Derek's conviction. And Tasha stood on her other side wearing sunglasses to hide tears of relief that her best friend had not only survived but was thriving in ways that middle-aged divorced women weren't supposed to thrive according to society's limited imagination. The months following the trial were filled with rebuilding, not just Naomi's business, which had suffered during her illness and recovery, but her entire sense of self and trust and belief in her ability to read people and situations. She threw herself into work with renewed energy, landing 3 major development deals that would transform underserved black neighborhoods in Atlanta into thriving mixed-use communities with affordable housing and local business opportunities. She hired a therapist, a black woman named Dr. Patricia Holmes, who specialized in trauma and betrayal and helping survivors move forward without letting their past define their future. And in those weekly sessions, Naomi learned to separate her worth from her failed marriage and her near-death experience from her identity as a successful businesswoman and human being deserving of love and respect. She also hired a personal chef and a food taster, which sounded paranoid when she first mentioned it, but made perfect sense when you considered that she had been poisoned in her own home by someone who was supposed to protect her, and everyone agreed that trauma responses were valid even when they seemed excessive to people who hadn't almost died from antifreeze in their morning smoothie. Her mother moved in for a few months, not because Naomi needed constant supervision, but because both of them needed the comfort of family after coming so close to a funeral that would have destroyed them both, and they spent evenings cooking together and watching old movies and slowly healing the wound that Derek's betrayal had opened in their family. Naomi also made changes to her business structure, removing Derek's name from everything and buying out his stake in the company with money from a legal settlement that ensured he would profit nothing from the business they had supposedly built together, even though everyone knew Naomi had done 90% of the actual work while Derek played golf and cheated on her with his assistant. She promoted more women into leadership positions, created a mentorship program for young black women interested in real estate development, and started a non-profit organization called Second Chances that helped women leaving abusive relationships get back on their feet with job training and housing assistance and therapy that Naomi wished had been available to her before she married a man who would eventually try to kill her. The work was fulfilling in ways that making money had never quite achieved, and Naomi realized that surviving death had given her clarity about what mattered and what was just noise and distraction from living a meaningful life that contributed something positive to the world beyond quarterly profits and property acquisitions. She also started dating again, carefully and slowly, going out with a few different men who were properly vetted by both Tasha and Marcus, who had appointed themselves as Naomi's official screening committee to make sure no more sociopaths or gold diggers or potential poisoners entered her life disguised as romantic prospects. Most of the dates were pleasant but forgettable, nice men who were intimidated by her success or put off by her story or just not compatible with who she had become after surviving attempted murder and rebuilding her life from the ground up. But then she met Dr. Marcus Thompson, a cardiovascular surgeon at Grady Memorial Hospital who had actually been part of the team that saved her life when her heart stopped, though she didn't remember him from that night when she was too busy dying to notice individual doctors in the chaos of her emergency resuscitation. They met again at a charity gala 6 months after the trial, both of them attending solo and ending up at the same table where they talked for 3 hours about everything from medicine to real estate to the challenges of being successful black professionals in Atlanta's complicated social landscape, where everyone knew everyone and gossip traveled faster than good news. Marcus was different from Derek in every way that mattered. Secure in his own success and genuinely impressed by Naomi's accomplishments rather than threatened by them, interested in her thoughts and opinions rather than just waiting for his turn to talk, and most importantly, completely transparent about his life and his intentions and his desire to get to know her slowly without pressure or expectations or hidden agendas involving life insurance policies and antifreeze. Their relationship developed naturally over months of dinners and conversations and shared experiences, building trust brick by brick the way Naomi now understood relationships should be built rather than the whirlwind romance she had fallen into with Derek when she was young and naive and believed that passion was the same thing as compatibility. Marcus was patient with her trauma responses, understanding when she needed space or got nervous about drinking anything he prepared, never pushing her beyond what she was ready for and proving through consistent actions rather than empty words that he was worthy of her trust and her time. 1 year after Derek's sentencing, Naomi stood in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta surrounded by 500 guests who had come to celebrate the launch of the Naomi Carter Foundation for Women's Empowerment and Safety, a non-profit organization funded by her business profits and dedicated to helping women escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives with dignity and support. The room was decorated in gold and white, elegant and sophisticated like everything Naomi touched, and as she stood at the podium looking out at the crowd of supporters and survivors and allies, she felt a sense of purpose and peace that she had never experienced during her marriage to a man who had valued her money more than her life. I almost died because I ignored warning signs and made excuses of behavior that should have sent me running, Naomi said into the microphone, her voice amplified through speakers that carried her words to every corner of the ballroom. I almost died because I believed that my husband's resentment of my success was normal, that his distance was just a phase, that his morning smoothies were acts of love rather than attempts at murder. But I survived, and I decided that my survival had to mean something more than just continuing to breathe and make money and pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. She talked about the foundation's programs, the safe houses and legal aid and job training and therapy services that would help women leave dangerous relationships before those relationships killed them. And as she talked, she saw heads nodding and people wiping tears and the kind of recognition that came from shared experience and collective trauma that bonded women together across race and class and geography. Dr. Marcus Thompson sat at a front table watching her with pride and admiration and the kind of genuine love that didn't come with conditions or resentment or poison hidden in morning beverages. And Naomi caught his eye and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and her heart and the parts of her soul that had been damaged but not destroyed by betrayal. The evening ended with Naomi surrounded by women who wanted to thank her for creating resources that might save their lives or the lives of their daughters or sisters or friends. And as she hugged strangers who felt like family united by survival and determination to build better futures, she realized that Derek and Jessica had ultimately failed in every way that mattered. They had tried to kill her and instead made her stronger, tried to steal her life and instead gave her purpose, tried to erase her from the world and instead made her more visible and more valuable and more committed to making sure other women didn't have to learn the hard way that some people wear love like a mask over intentions that are darker than death. Naomi went home that night to her mansion in Buckhead, the house that she had reclaimed and redecorated and filled with new memories that had nothing to do with a husband who had tried to murder her in its kitchen. And as she stood on her balcony looking out over Atlanta's glittering skyline, she felt grateful not just to be alive but to be thriving, to be building something meaningful, to be loved by people who celebrated her success rather than resenting it, and to be proof that surviving, betrayal and attempted murder could be the beginning of the best chapter of your life rather than the end. Marcus called to tell her the gala was beautiful and she was amazing and he was falling in love with her slowly and safely, and Naomi smiled into the phone and told him she was falling too, but this time with her eyes wide open and her instincts fully engaged and her heart protected but not closed, ready for happiness but not desperate for it, and that made all the difference in the world. Thank you so much for following Naomi's journey from near death to triumph. If this story touched your heart or taught you something about recognizing warning signs in relationships, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible and thriving is even better. Drop a comment telling me what you think about Naomi's happy ending. And don't forget to check out our other emotional stories because everyone deserves to know that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something even more beautiful. Stay strong. Stay safe, and remember that your life is worth protecting at all costs.